Steve, the Word of God is alive and powerful.
And sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing dividing asunder of the soul and the spirit, and the joints of the marrow, as a critic of the thoughts and intents of the heart.
All Scripture is God breathed.
It's profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be mature, thoroughly furnished unto all good works.
Study to show yourself approved unto God,
a workman that needs not to be ashamed,
rightly dividing the word of truth. Steve, give us about 15 seconds to prepare ourselves to study God's Word, and then you go ahead and close out our prayer time, okay?
Father, we thank you again for the privilege of coming this Wednesday to study the divine institution principles that we need to know as Christians, and all people need to understand these things to preserve our freedom. So bless Dr. Jims explains these truths to us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Steve. Tonight's subject is what?
The true meaning of the Supremacy Clause.
That's right, the Supremacy Clause. That's right. Steve, I would suggest that many Christians and many Americans don't understand the Supremacy Clause. What they do understand is what they've been told, if they've been told anything at all. If they've been listening at all, they've heard this somewhere along the line. Maybe it didn't make any sense to them, but here we go. The true meaning of the Supremacy Clause. Now, first of all, the Supremacy Clause is found in Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution of the United States of America. That's the location. So if you're reading through the Constitution, there will be Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, and every one of these articles, if they're long, they will have a clause, which means here's a specific section within the Supremacy Clause. And so anyway, this is where this is. Now, Article 6, Clause 2 reads this way. It says that this Constitution, and by the way, when you read this, when I read through this, I want you to think about the words that are being used there. And I'm not going to ask you, do you understand it? I'm just going to say, this is what it says. I'm wondering how many people have ever even read it, let alone know what it means. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made, under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. Now watch this. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. Now my thought and my question is, what in the world did they mean when they said this? Now, I've got these two documents, or these two pictures over here, the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution, and then we have the Constitution with the phrase here, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, in quotes, okay? Now, that I just read is, in fact, the Supremacy Clause. Now, if we don't understand what that means, then when the government does something, whether it is the Congress passing a bill, whether it is the president with an executive order, whether it's the Supreme Court making a ruling, any one of those three branches of the government could be doing something unconstitutional. We don't know that it is because we don't understand what this means. And the next thing you know, we wake up and we look up and says, where do my freedoms go? Where do they go? Okay? Now let's talk about the meaning of the phrase of the two words, pursuance and thereof. Now let's go back up here and take a look at this. Right there in Article 6, Clause 2, there's the word pursuance, and there's the word thereof. In pursuance thereof. Now the question is, what do those two words mean? Well, the word pursuance actually means what? You go ahead and read that.
A process that results in accomplishing something.
That's right. I'm going to put an S on that, okay? So it's a process that results in accomplishing something. So whatever's happening when there is something in pursuance of, That actually means there's a process out here, and when you finally go through the process, you're coming out, you're going to try to accomplish something by that process. Now, what does the word thereof mean?
It means of that,
Mhm.
and that refers to this Constitution.
So what that means is, dictionary-wise, the phrase thereof actually means of that. Now, the question then is, in pursuance of that, what is that? And it refers to the Constitution. Now, let's make an application of those two words, Steve. Go ahead.
For Congress to make a law that is constitutional, Congress must follow a process that results in a law being constitutional.
Now, do you understand what that says?
Isn't there
Okay, now,
protocol?
sure. Now, here's the issue. If we were to say, well, okay, they're going to follow a process. Well, yeah, they've been following a process all right, but it hasn't been right. So the question is, if they're going to follow a process, where do you find that process? That process is going to be given to you in the Constitution. Okay? Now, the next phrase here, go ahead and read this next phrase.
In the context of Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause, the phrase in pursuance thereof implies that for a law made by Congress to be a valid law, that law cannot violate any aspect of the Constitution.
Is that pretty clear?
Safeguard. Yes.
So that phrase, in pursuance thereof, is extremely important, but because that implies that for a law made by Congress to be valid, that law cannot violate any aspect of the Constitution. Okay, let's read the next phrase here.
The true end of all congressional lawmaking is that no part of a law will violate any part of the Constitution.
See, that's the idea. So that when Congress makes a law, they need to make sure that that law, every aspect of that law is constitutional, and by constitutional it means no aspect of that law violates anything in the Constitution. Now, again, if you and I don't know what the Constitution says, if we don't know what that phrase in pursuance thereof means, listen, the wool could be pulled over our eyes, and it has been pulled over the majority of Americans' eyes. So this is why we are where we are today. Now, notice this. I've got three things here. First of all, the true end of all congressional lawmaking. So that means when they start to make a law. The Senate may start it. They pass it by a majority. It goes over to the House of Representatives. It must pass there by a majority. Now, if it doesn't pass by a majority in either one of those, they say, wait a minute, Senate, you instituted this thing. We have some disagreement with that. So what happens, they send it back to Senate, and the Senate says, okay, we'll consider these things, and then he pass it back to the House of Representatives. They were looking for a compromise in there somewhere. Now, when both houses then pass this thing with a majority vote, then it goes on to the president for his signature. But the true end of all congressional lawmaking, whether it starts in the Senate, whether it starts in the House of Representatives, the true end of that is somewhere along the line, they need to make sure that there is no part of that law or that proposed bill, that bill, is going to violate any part of the Constitution. Be mindful of the fact that we out here, if we don't know what the Constitution says, we look at this bill and he said, well, I don't like this, but guess what can I do about it? You know, it's law. Well, here's the issue. Three things, Steve.
Number one, it cannot go beyond federal authority.
Now, what is it?
Whatever bill they're trying
the proposed
bill.
That's exactly right. So that proposed bill can't go beyond the federal authority. The federal authority means that authority that we, the people, delegated to Congress, to really the federal branch of government, whether it's Congress, whether it's executive branch, or whether it is the judicial branch.
It can't usurp that.
That's right. Yeah. It cannot. See, these people then in Congress, when they're making laws, and remember, the Congress makes laws, the judicial branch, that is the Supreme Court, they interpret law, and the president, he enforces law. So each of these branches have a job to do. Well, what happens is Congress making a law, that law cannot go beyond federal authority.
Their job should be to look at it, analyze it, think in terms of it does this, not violate federal authority.
That's exactly right.
And when they say stuff like, well, I guess I'll have to read it to pass it, that's not right. They should have already been looking in there for that, right?
Absolutely. And oftentimes what they will do, Steve, is Congress will pass something if in other words, let's say it is unconstitutional to some degree, but the majority is looking to pass this, and they have a majority to pass it, then what happens, the group that are the minority say, look, this is not right. However, or maybe I'm not sure, but I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll just wait for the Supreme Court to analyze this for us and make a determination. No, what we're going to see something about that. All of our representatives up there have a responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see that later. So we know this. The law cannot go beyond federal authority, okay? Secondly,
it cannot violate state authority.
So a
federal
bill passed, a federal law, cannot violate state authority. Okay, next point.
It cannot violate the inalienable rights of we the people.
So what it amounts to, we've got three different levels of sovereignty. We've got the federal government, we got the state government, and now we've got we the people. Okay, so none of these things can happen and be a constitutional law. Okay. Now let's move on from there, Steve. One more statement here.
Every federal law made must be in pursuance thereof, meaning in pursuance of the Constitution.
See, in other words, it's a process. You're looking to get to an end, and it must be in line. That's exactly right. It has to be in line with the Constitution. Now, again, we have to know what authority we, the people, have given to the federal branch, including the Congress, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Article 1 in the Constitution is going to tell us what Congress can do. Now listen to me. When you read Article 1, which was designed to tell Congress, not the president, not the Supreme Court, not the judiciary, but Article 1 was designed to tell Congress, this is what you can do. Now, interesting enough, when you read what Congress can do, there are only 18 things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to count them. They're not numbered, but you have to count them, okay? Now, with that in mind then, in every law made by Congress, it must be made in pursuance thereof. Now, again, if we're having trouble with in pursuance thereof, go back and read the definitions we gave you back there. Okay, now, let's understand the Supremacy Clause phrases, because I've broken that down into phrases, and what I will do is you read the left-hand side one at a time, and you read the left-hand side, then I'm going to give the meaning on the right-hand side, okay? So what's the first thing?
This Constitution.
Okay, this is part of the Supremacy Clause now. That refers to the federal Constitution because, look, there are two constitutions that we're dealing with. One is the federal Constitution, and the other is the state constitution. In context, this is the federal Constitution. It's what we have told Congress it can do, okay? Secondly.
And the laws of the United States.
So this Constitution and the laws. Now, notice this. The Constitution is law. Do you understand that? The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So now we've got the Constitution, and then we have the legislative branch of Congress, a legislative branch of government in Washington, D.C., and they're going to make laws. So you've got the Constitution as law, but that's not all. There are also the laws of the United States. So the laws of the United States here, that refers to congressional legislation. Every proposed bill, passed bill, we're talking about that. So you've got the Constitution, law, and the laws made by Congress. Go ahead.
Which shall be made.
Okay. What are we talking about? What are they making?
They're making laws.
There you go. They're making laws. So, which shall be made? What are they doing? This is proposed laws proposed by Congress and passed. Okay. Now the next thing is what?
In pursuance thereof.
Okay, and that means according to the federal Constitution. Okay. What's the next phrase?
All treaties made.
All treaties made. Now watch this. All treaties, what's the next word?
Made.
Made, that's past tense.
Past tense.
So that means treaties that are already in existence. But that's not all. It's what's the next one?
All treaties that shall be made.
So what happens now, the Constitution, the laws of the United States, they must be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, existing treaties, or which shall be made, future treaties, what's that? What's that?
Under the authority of the United States.
That means the limited and enumerated authority delegated to the federal government. So what happens is that when you pass a law, when you make a treaty, or when you make a treaty in the future, you can only do that under the authority of the United States. That's federal government, okay? Those treaties, those laws must be made. They must be made under the authority of the United States. Question: where did they get that authority?
From we the people.
There you go, Steve. That's exactly right. That needs to be understood. It's the authority that we gave them when the Constitution was ratified. We the people ratified that from every state, okay? So we're gonna see that they're gonna make these laws and treaties under the authority of the United States. And then what does it say about these laws, the Constitution, and these treaties that are made under the Constitution? What are they doing? What are they?
They shall be the supreme law of the land.
What supreme law mean?
The ultimate.
That means nothing higher.
Nothing higher.
Nothing higher. So these laws, these treaties, these things, when they're made in pursuance of the Constitution, these then are the supreme law of the land. Now watch this. Once we know that's true, watch what happens here. Go ahead.
And the judges in every state.
Now, the judges in every state, that is the courtroom judges in every state, okay? So the judges in every state. So you go to a courtroom, here you got a judge, over here you got a judge, over here you got a judge. And the judges in every state, they're required then to follow the law, the Constitution, the laws that are made by Congress, treaties, if treaty happens to be an issue. But these judges in every state, that means in Arkansas, and if we just listed all 50 states, California, New York, Oregon, Washington, Florida, in the judges in every state, what about them? Do what?
Shall be bound thereby.
And that means they shall be required to follow. So there's no option.
So those state judges in the courtroom have to follow the supreme law of the land when they make their decisions, their rulings, and all they do.
That's exactly right. See, they have to know the law. See, this is why today, when you talk about the Ninth Circuit Court in California, there are liberal judges there that they know the Constitution, but they are liberal. They want to do away with the United States as we understand it, and they're making these rulings. And guess what? They make the ruling, and we've got to live by it. Okay?
It's unconstitutional.
That's exactly right. And then you say, well, wait a minute, you could take it to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court stacked up with all kinds of laws, they put them on a timetable. Okay? So the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Watch this, next point.
To anything in the
Constitution. Okay.
Anything in the Constitution.
So they shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution, okay? And that means any article or any clause in the Constitution. And there's a second thing. So the Constitution is law, but we got another set of laws. Go ahead. What's the next one?
Or the laws of any state.
Or the laws of any state. So what that means, you're looking at something that deals with Washington, D.C.
Federal.
And you're also looking at the laws in a state. And the next phrase is what?
To the contrary, notwithstanding.
That means then, in spite of anything in the Constitution or any state law. That means these people, we're going to explain that some more, that what this means is, if the law that is being passed is not contrary to anything in a state law, then that law is the supreme law of the land. Now that almost sounds like, wow, Washington, D.C.'s got it all together, and that's what we're being told. So let's once again talk about pursuance, okay?
Once again, pursuance means a process that results in accomplishing something.
Okay, and once again?
Once again, thereof means of that, and refers back to the first two words in the sentence, this Constitution.
So what we're seeing here then is any law that is passed by Congress must be in pursuance thereof. It must be in line with everything that the Constitution says.
Correctly interpreted.
That's exactly right. Now, what are we the people being told? Now, this is what you need to understand. We just explained the foundation of this thing. Now we're going to see what are we being told. So you go ahead and read this entire statement here, Steve.
Well, generally speaking, attorneys, judges, and politicians often say that the United States Congress passes a law or the U.S. Supreme Court makes a decision. The state governments and we the people must obey that law or decision without question because of the Supremacy Clause. But that statement is blatantly false.
Stop right now. I'm telling you that attorneys, judges, politicians, news media, anybody that's out there that's been told what this is supposed to mean, they will be telling you this, and I'm indicating to you that they often say that the United States Congress, if it passes a law, or the U.S. Supreme Court, see, the Supreme Court doesn't pass laws, they rule on it. But if the law is passed, or the Supreme Court makes a decision, state governments, that means we down here in our legislature, we the people down here, we can't do anything except be obedient to that law. We've seen in the state of Arkansas recently, within the last year and a half or so, our Governor Asa Hutchinson has been conflicted because on one case, the Supreme Court made a decision and he said, well, we don't have to follow that. We don't have to follow that. And what he was indicating, he was interposing between the federal government and us. He was absolutely right. Shortly after that, another thing came along, and he made this statement. He said, well, the Supreme Court has ruled that way, so I guess we've got to abide by it. Our Attorney General, I know her personally. I like the lady, period. She's okay. But guess what? She told me the very same thing. Very same thing. And if you ask them about the 14th Amendment, they can say, oh, yeah, it's okay. But what I'm indicating to you, read that statement one more time. And if you're out there on Facebook or you're out here on WebEx, you better hear what I'm talking about. Say it, Steve.
Well, generally speaking, attorneys, judges, and politicians often say that the United States Congress passed a law.
If
the United States Congress passes a law or the U.S. Supreme Court makes a decision, the state governments and we the people must obey that law or decision without question because of the Supremacy Clause.
So what that means is everybody in our state legislature, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, independent, whatever you happen to be, if you are there in that state government, you have to abide by that. You have to believe that because the Supremacy Clause, we're being told, makes that law supreme. We the people are told the same thing.
Some of our government leaders aren't even doing that.
Well, we'll see that.
Yeah, like we just talked about.
Yeah, we'll see that. Exactly right. And those are they're just made minor incidents.
I know what you're talking about.
was told, Steve, by a Republican representative in the state of Arkansas in one of the very first ARPN, Arkansas Pastors Network. I was challenged by a state representative here in the legislature. And I went back and sat down and talked with him about this after it's all over. And he told me no. He says, that's not it. He said, no, if the Supreme Court rules, we have to abide by that. I said, no. He said, well, who's sovereign? Who's superior in this? I said, I am. I am. We are. And we'll see whether or not my statement is right when we listen to our founding fathers. But that statement that we have to abide by an unconstitutional law simply because the Supreme Court says, oh, that's law, that statement is blatantly false, okay? Now,
you know, Dr. Jim, they go by a false law and say they have to follow it, but if something is the Constitution and they choose not to follow it.
Well, Steve, you're absolutely right.
Our governor took an oath to
No, don't go there just yet.
Yeah.
Don't go there yet.
Okay.
You're going to be right, but you're jumping the gun, okay? That's very good.
But I like that capital letters and that big statement at the end there.
Oh, yeah. That statement is blatantly wrong. And I put it on Facebook tonight as I was introducing this. I said, look, please don't argue with me. Don't argue with me. Either prove me wrong or keep quiet.
Or believe it. Believe the truth.
Absolutely. Now, here's something we need to understand here. I've got two sides
Well,
here,
this is
Steve.
good, yeah.
And I said, this is the way it is on the left-hand
Mhm.
side. This is what we're being told by the attorneys, politicians, and others, okay?
Mhm.
Now, let's take a look at the left-hand side. This is the way it is. And what we're going to do is talk about sovereignty levels on both sides of the
Mhm.
equation, okay? So this is the way it is. On the left-hand side,
Mhm.
who is sovereign?
We the people.
Okay, now I didn't number these,
Mhm.
but let's put a number 1
One.
there,
Mhm.
a number 2 in the second one, and number 3 here. That means we the people are sovereign.
Mhm.
Then who's next?
The state
The
government.
state government, which is lowest?
The federal
The
government.
federal government. So in terms of sovereignty, we the people are sovereign over the state government and the federal government.
Mhm.
That means you out there on WebEx right now, that you on WebEx, you on Facebook. And by the way, that means your children, your grandchildren are superior to the federal government because they are a part of we the people. That hasn't changed. Secondly, we the people are sovereign over the state government, federal government. We the people and the state government are superior to the federal government. So which one is the lowest on totem pole?
The federal government.
The federal government is lowest on the totem pole. Understand that, friends. Now, on the other side of the equation, because of what we've been talking about up here, this in pursuance thereof, what we find, and this is what we're being told then by certain attorneys, certain politicians, certain other people. We're hearing this in the news media. So sovereignty levels in terms of what we are being told, all of which is false. Who is sovereign?
The federal government.
Yeah, and they're superior over whom?
The state government and we the people.
That's right. So
Backwards.
they're federal. So they are superior to the state and federal government, and the state government is superior to whom?
We the people.
Now, what we need to realize is this: that in every state, let me go back. In the federal level, we have not only a constitution, but we have a Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. Now, what you need to realize is the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are organically connected, so that when you talk about the Constitution, you're talking about both the federal Constitution and the Bill of Rights together.
Mhm.
It's implied. Now, you could talk about the Constitution, and you're just focusing on the federal Constitution without the Bill of Rights. You could be talking about the Bill of Rights, but we need to understand that the Constitution is comprised of 7 articles and the Bill of Rights, okay? Now, any constitutional law between number 11 and 27, okay? Now, notice this. We've just seen this is the way it is. It's the way it's supposed to be. Okay? That's not the way it's being practiced.
Mhm.
But this is the way it's supposed to be. This is what we're being told by the elite, okay? Now, with that in mind, let's shift gears here. And what we want to talk about is the 3 missing words,
Mhm.
okay? And what are the 3 missing words?
In pursuance thereof.
In pursuance thereof. Now, we ought to have a little bit of understanding right now then about what that phrase, in pursuance thereof, means. Any law that is passed by Congress must be in it's right, but it's in pursuance thereof of the Constitution, but that means in line
Right along with it.
with what the Constitution says. Not as you tell us it is, it's as it was intended to be understood. Now, what we're going to do, Steve, is this. 3 missing words, in pursuance thereof. Let's share that statement with me.
Read it again, minus 3 words, and this is the way attorneys, judges, and politicians would like for you to believe is the true reading of the Supremacy Clause. But this reading doesn't match the real Supremacy Clause.
Now, what somebody might have to do is, as I read this, and they may say, well, what's missing here? Then go back up and read it originally, and see, and you ask yourself, what are the 3 words that are missing? So here's the way it's explained. They don't read it to you. They're not going to read it to you. If they read it, you got them. Then you got them. Mm-hmm. But what happens? They are going to interpret it in the way that I'm going to read it here. Mm-hmm. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made, and all treaties made, or which shall be made.
Missing words.
Just a second. Okay. Let me go back again. Please make sure your microphones are off. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made, and all treaties made, or which shall be made, under the authority of the United States, shall be supreme law of the land, and judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Would you please tell me what three words are left out?
In pursuance
In
thereof.
pursuance thereof. And you take those three words out and read that, it says any law that is passed in Congress is the supreme law of the land. We are bound on the state level, and we are bound individually.
Because there have been some passed that are not in pursuance thereof.
Absolutely. Oh, yes. Some, more. Some, yes. And that some is a whole lot, okay? Now, understanding that, when the attorneys, the judges, the politicians, and others, the news media, they're going to talk about the Supremacy Clause, if they mention it all, and this is the way they're going to tell you it's implying, okay? Because they'll leave out those three words. Now, they're not going to read it to you and leave them out. They're just going to tell you that this is what it says, but they are leaving it out mentally and explaining to you what's constitutional, and they're lying to you. They're lying to you. Now, let's move on from there for just a moment. The federal Constitution is, the federal Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Yes, it is. Now, read this next statement.
That's a true statement. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land.
Now, what happens, Steve? Somebody reads that, or you make that kind of a statement without explaining it, it seems as though that contradicts what we said above.
It's there already, so that's the supreme law.
Now, here's what happens, though. When you're talking about the Constitution, you have to realize, and we're going to deal with this down a little lower here, we're going to realize that we, the people, hold all of the authority. So that when the Constitution was written at that point in time, each state had a state constitution, and what was in each state constitution may be different, a little different than the one next door or the one over there. So the constitutions in the states did not all say the same thing. So what happened then is that when one state had a constitution, another state had a constitution, this would seem to indicate then, no matter what that is, that the Constitution on the federal level is the supreme law of the land, and it doesn't make any difference what you have down there in that state. However, that statement, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, that statement doesn't mean that every law passed by Congress or every decision made by the Supreme Court is the supreme law of the land. Because here's what happens. When the 13 states formed the Constitution, in that Constitution, before they ratified it, all authority was held by the people. Okay? Now, what happened then is they have all the authority. They then, before the federal government was created, those people in the state, they still, in each state, those people in each state had all of the authority. For example, in Arkansas, all the citizens in Arkansas held the authority. So when they made their own constitution for Arkansas, they delegated a portion of their authority to the state. And the state then, they formed a constitution in the state, and guess what? They actually created a Declaration of Rights that is synonymous with the Bill of Rights on the federal level. So to make sure that the Constitution in the state of Arkansas was understood, they created this Declaration of Rights, and every citizen in the state of Arkansas ought to read their Declaration of Rights. That means these are the things that clarify the meaning of the Arkansas Constitution. So this is a true statement. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, but it tells the federal government what it can't do, what it can do. It tells the state what it can do and what it can't do. You got that? So what happens is states make laws, the federal government makes laws, and the state laws cannot violate the authority we gave to the federal government. And the federal government can't violate what is down here in the state, okay? So that's why this statement is true. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, but that doesn't say that that means that every law passed by a Congress or every decision made by the Supreme Court is the law of the land. That's not correct. So what we have then, when we're studying this, is what I call the big if. The big if. Now, what is the big if? Here we go.
The laws of the United States are the supreme law of the land. The big if.
If, go ahead.
Those laws are made in pursuance of the Constitution.
So the laws of the United States on the federal level, yeah, they're supreme.
Mm-hmm.
If
they're right.
those laws are made in pursuance of the Constitution.
In line with the Constitution.
That's exactly right. Now remember, read this next phrase again.
In pursuance of the Constitution means that any law passed by Congress that doesn't meet every standard in the Constitution is an unconstitutional law. And we, the people, are under no obligation to be obedient to that law because it is no law at all.
Stop right there. You better understand, folks, what that means. And if you know that the federal government is usurping its authority, which means it is infringing on your inalienable rights, whatever they happen to be, these people are infringing, and you sit back and complain and don't do anything about it, guess what? You are at fault. You are at fault. And it doesn't make any difference whether you're white, black, rich, poor, educated, uneducated, whether you're a Latino, whether you're a Chinaman, or whatever. If you're a citizen of the United States and you are allowing this to happen without raising your voice. So I'm suggesting at this point in time that the Caucasian race had better be talking to the Caucasians. The black or the Negro race, however you want to talk about it. I'm confused today about what to call it. But the black race, the Negro race, please, you ought to be talking about the Constitution to the people in your race. People that are Latino, they had better be talking to the people about the laws of this nation, because here's the issue. If
you don't know what's being pulled over on you, how are you going to stand up against it?
And please understand, we're talking about federal government. We're talking about state government. We're talking about county government. We're talking about the municipal government. And the truth of the matter is, you say, wait a minute, just a second, you're talking about politics. Okay, hold on just a second. Let's let the Congress, let's let the federal government rule our lives and take away all of our freedoms. We are in the angelic conflict. We have a responsibility before God to do what we need to do, to preach the gospel, to worship as we desire, be a friend of Israel. You understand that?
That can be taken away from
us by them. And that's exactly right. And listen, we, the people, need to stand up without regard to who we are, and especially if we are Christians, okay? So let's read this statement up here again, in pursuance thereof.
In pursuance of the Constitution means that any law passed by Congress that doesn't meet every standard in the Constitution, it's an unconstitutional law. And we, the people, are under no obligation to be obedient to that law, because then it makes it no law at all. If it's wrong.
That's exactly right. It is
not
no
in line with the
law
Constitution
at all.
It is null and
null and void.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Now, so we're talking about up here, the laws of the United States are the supreme core of the law, supreme law of the land. If. Okay. Now down here, the second one is no big if. No big if, okay? Please note, go ahead.
Please note that the federal Constitution is not intended by an if clause.
That's right. There's no if clause in that. So in other words, the federal Constitution is the supreme law of the land if. No, it was created to be the supreme law of the land. Now, the significance of a no if clause. Okay, so there's no if clause regarding the federal Constitution. Well, what does that mean? Go ahead and read the next one.
If no if clause is attached to the federal Constitution, that means that under no condition is the federal Constitution inferior to any other law of the land.
Okay, so let's take a look at that again, just real slow. That no if clause, there is no if clause there. So because there is no if clause attached to the federal Constitution, It means that under no condition, under no condition is the federal Constitution inferior to any other law of the land. Now, again, that sounds like a contradiction, because we just said, wait a minute, excuse me, that we said that statement is blatantly false. What we have to understand is what that's saying. There are no condition under no condition is the federal Constitution. Just look, there's a whole Constitution, and there's no other law here that is superior to this.
Exactly.
Simply because that federal Constitution, we are telling in the federal Constitution, federal government, you can do this right here, just a little bit, and we've not only listed it, enumerated it. See, the word enumerated means listed. You can read it. It's not only enumerated, it is limited, because we the people have this much, and we gave the federal government that much right there. So that no if clause is attached to the federal Constitution means that under no condition is the federal Constitution inferior to any other law of the land, which means then when you read the Constitution, it tells the federal government what it can do. It tells Congress what it can do. It tells the president what he can do. It tells the judiciary what it can do. Down here, it tells the states what it can do, and the Constitution tells from the state level what you folks up in Washington can do. So under no condition is the federal Constitution inferior to any law in the land.
It is superior to
That's
all
exactly right. Now again, but that doesn't mean that the federal government has all the control. See? Now move on here.
It also means that the federal Constitution is superior to the wants or desires of we the people, until the federal Constitution is amended to provide for the wants or desires of we the people.
Now, if somebody reads that just alone and without the context, that might be saying, just a second here, that's a little iffy here. This also means, since there's no if clause attached to the federal Constitution, this also means that the federal Constitution is superior to the wants and desires of we the people. Now watch this. See, we have a federal Constitution that, when understood as it is intended to be understood, is going to tell these people who are we the people. We the people at this point in time. This is just an application. We the people. That's you. That's me. That's the people on WebEx. The people on Facebook. The people out there in the world. Those are we the people. But let's suppose for a moment that the wants and desires of we the people. You've got this mob out here. They want college education paid for. They want health care paid for. They want all other kind of amenities. They want a free cell phone. They want the majority of the people want to tax the wealthy 90% of their income. Okay. Now what happens? This means that the federal Constitution is superior to the wants and desires of we the people. So that you may want education, free education for everybody. The Constitution doesn't allow it. You may want free health care. The Constitution doesn't allow it. You may want this out here. You may want the taxes raised on the rich. The Constitution doesn't allow that. So it means then that the federal Constitution is superior to the wants and desires of the people. Now that's not yours, you and me. See, even you and me, if what we want as people who are a spiritual people, a body of Christ people, and we want, for example, we may want the federal government to impose on the people, on the religion in the United States, make everybody Baptist. No, let's make everybody Lutheran. See, we may want that. But the truth of the matter is, it also means that the federal Constitution is superior to the desires and the wants of we the people until the federal Constitution is amended. So we may not get the free education. We may not get the free health care. We may not get these things. But if you want to, then let's get together and change the Constitution. Until then, keep your mouth shut.
They need to obey what it says. They're bound to it. Or, like you say, go through the proper process, which, as you know, is my beef about the state of Arkansas. I won't get into that. that they have to bring so many names on the petition and bring the ballot, do it the right way. And then if they change it, then we have to obey
That's
it.
exactly
But if
right.
not, we shouldn't cave in to what they assume that it says, or if they want to, because they get all that free stuff. They cave in and give it to them without allowing them to go through that process or even giving us the opportunity to vote against it.
Okay, now watch this. Hold it now. See, what happens then, to violate the Constitution, what you have to have is a court system out here, a judge out here, who's going to reinterpret the Constitution to mean something other than what it means. That's why we, the people, need to understand the intent that because these are legal contracts. The Constitution is a legal contract. And you just can't, as a party to the contract, as a part of the contract, when you sign that contract, you can't change the meaning of the terms down the future unless both parties agree to do this.
And you amend it and you do it.
That's exactly right.
Legally do it. Yeah.
That's right. Now, what about those who represent we, the people? Okay, that's these people we're sending to Washington, and even the people we're sending to the state government. But we're talking about we'll see here. So, what about those people who represent we, the people? Go ahead.
Well, every statement and or action by those in government who represent we, the people, must always be constitutional statements and or actions to be lawful.
That's right. See, every action,
or they're not lawful.
Every statement or every action that comes out of these people's mouths or out of their hands, whatever they're doing, what must always be constitutional statements and or constitutional actions to be lawful. Okay. Now, what that means is you've got these people on the state level in the General Assembly, Republicans, Democrats, in the House and the Senate. Now, guess what? You got the same thing up in Washington, D.C. We vote for these people, and we send them to Congress, and we send them to the General Assemblies. Now, what happens is every statement that is made by any of those people, any of them, any action that they take, they're representing us. And their actions and or statements must always be constitutional statements or constitutional actions, or they are not lawful. Okay? Now watch this statement here, Steve. This comes from a Supreme Court decision called Marbury versus Madison. If you are out there, whoever you are, I would take that and understand just the statement, Marbury versus Madison. Now watch this. Read that.
Wow, this is scary. All laws which are repugnant to the Constitution are null and void.
Okay, now just in case somebody doesn't understand these words, what does the word repugnant mean?
It's in conflict with, it's incompatible with.
Okay, so at this point in time, you've got a law that's repugnant, and it's repugnant to what?
To the
regular. It's repugnant to the what?
Constitution.
So
what that with the Constitution.
So what that means then is if you have a law that is in conflict with the Constitution, what that means then, Steve, that law was not made in pursuance thereof.
Talking about law, you mean that would be an amendment to the Constitution?
No.
Law.
This is a law passed by Congress.
It's not in line with what the Constitution says.
That's exactly right.
Okay,
so what happens, you've got the Constitution, and then that's why I said there are two levels of laws here.
Some government branch passes a law that's not.
Now hold it now. It's not some branch of government. There's only one branch of government that can pass laws. What is that?
Constitution.
No.
I mean, Congress.
Congress, that's right. So any law passed by Congress, which is repugnant to the Constitution, that means that law is not made in pursuance thereof. Okay? So otherwise, if you don't know in pursuance thereof, then what's going to happen is the attorney, the judges, the politicians, and the news media and everybody else say, well, it's a law. And since it's a law, it must be constitutional. And it's not made in pursuance thereof.
So in the meanwhile, we have to stand up and just not obey it because it's null and void, make a stand, or have to get some people in the office to go back and undo it.
We're going to see that in just a minute. We're going to see that in just a minute. So all laws which are repugnant to the Constitution, that means in conflict with, incompatible with the Constitution. What are they? They are null and void. And what does null and void mean?
Invalid.
It means invalid. So any law that is not in conjunction with the Constitution, not compatible, it is null and void. It's invalid. And guess what? We're told rightfully so, that you are not obligated to be obedient to an unconstitutional law. Now, when you stand up, listen to me, please, you may go to jail. You may go to jail. But the truth of the matter is do you want the truth? Because somewhere along the line, truth is going to win out. And if we don't do anything, guess what?
Evil will win out.
We're done. So we've got to do something about this. Now, read that statement one more time and listen. This statement comes from the Supreme Court of the United States. Marbury versus Madison is the case.
That's way back in 1803, by the way.
Yes.
All laws which are repugnant to the Constitution are null and void.
Good. Okay. Now, there's something else here. Now, this comes from Miranda versus Arizona, and this is Supreme Court ruling. What does that say?
Where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rule making or legislation which would abrogate them.
Okay, now stop right here. Where rights are secured by the Constitution. Excuse me, right here.
Yes.
Now, hold it now, just a second. I'm going to ask a question and lead you through this. Where rights secured by the Constitution. Question, where do rights come from?
We the people.
No.
Well, from the Constitution
No.
itself. Oh, and their native rights come from God.
There you go.
Right,
See, that's the difference between rights and privileges.
Rights.
Our rights come from God. So what happens is, our founding fathers understanding that our rights came from God, the laws of nature and nature's God, okay? Where rights secured by the Constitution. The Constitution is going to take those rights that were given to us by God and do what? The word begins with an S.
Secured.
They're going to secure those. That's what the Constitution is designed to do. It is to secure our rights. So read up to the comma.
Where rights secured by the Constitution are involved.
Okay. Now what happens? So you've got some rights that are secured by the Constitution. So that means when you know what your rights are, okay?
You're dealing with them.
That's right. And the Constitution then is going to do something about those rights. The Constitution is designed by our founding fathers to secure those rights. Now, we'll find out, what do rights secured by the federal Constitution mean? Right here. Just read that.
Please note that the federal Constitution does not grant rights to we the people. The federal Constitution was designed to secure, protect the inalienable rights divinely granted to all human beings, which includes, of course, the citizens of the United States.
See, this idea of the rights of people, it doesn't even matter where you are on the planet. If you're a human being in the angelic conflict, and you are, God has given you certain inalienable rights. You are given volition. You can take those inalienable rights and you can do anything you want to with them. You can take those inalienable rights and desire a securing of that. But you see what happened, the federal government was designed to secure those rights because you as an individual can't battle the entire world. You can't battle the federal government. You can't battle something else out here. So the federal government is going to be created to guarantee that your rights are going to be secured. But when you have a federal government that is incompatible with the Constitution, guess what? Your rights are going out the window. So the rights are going to be secured by the federal Constitution, and it's telling the federal government, here's what your responsibility is: not to give us a free cell phone, not to give us free health care, not to give us a college education. It's to protect our freedoms, period. Period. Now, let's read this whole thing again. Go ahead.
Where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rule-making or legislation which would abrogate them.
See, there's no rule or legislation that can take those away.
Can take them.
Federal government is designed to protect our rights, not give us privileges, okay? Now, listen, see, that's in Miranda versus Arizona. Now, let's take a look. We need to understand something about when a law is determined to be unconstitutional, okay? And here's the issue. A law could actually be made in 1870. Just pick a date back there somewhere. 1920. How about 1904? 2014. This is 2019. So we're asking, if a law is proposed and passed, the question is, what is the date a law is determined to be unconstitutional? Because you may make that law in 1870, and 2019, you and I wake up and say, wait a minute, this isn't right. But we're all looking from 2019 back to 1870, or back to 1920, or to 2014. So read the paragraph.
The general rule is that unconstitutional law,
An
unconstitutional law, though having the form and name of law, is in reality no law, but is wholly void and ineffective for the purpose, since its unconstitutionally dates from the date,
unconstitutionality,
and since its unconstitutionality dates from the date it was proposed in Congress, and not merely from the date it was passed by Congress.
So what happens is X1 here on the line indicates Congress proposes a law. Proposes a law. What that means, you propose a law in the House or the Senate. You pass it to the other House. The both have a majority. Send it to the president. He signs it. It's law. Okay. From the time they proposed it, when they stand up and say, "I've got a suggestion here. I want to talk about a law here." Okay, so the moment that Congress proposes that law, then what we have is a timeline between X1 and X2. And it could be a week, it could be 3 days, it could be a month, it could be 7 years, it could be a decade, okay, to where, the Congress passes the law. And by the way, it could be a long period of time because it may not pass in the other house, and they wrangle with it. How many times have we heard President Trump say they've been trying to do this for 42 years? He said, and finally, he said, we got it done in 6 months or something like that, okay? So X1 represents the moment that Congress proposes a law, and X2 is the time it passes a law. Then notice that law may be in effect for a week, 50 years, a decade, a century. But the question is, on that timeline, when did it become unconstitutional?
That's X1, where it was right from the beginning when it was proposed.
Read it.
Yeah. An unconstitutional law is unconstitutional from the point of X1, which is when it was proposed.
When it was proposed. So no matter how long it's been since it was proposed, passed, and been operational, it doesn't make a bit of difference. It was unconstitutional back there when it was passed. Excuse me. A law that was passed that is unconstitutional, there is no reason for it, it's not given to us authority in the Constitution, is Social Security. Listen to me. Social Security. Go back and look when that was proposed. Then when it was passed, how long it's been in operational. It's been unconstitutional since the day it was passed. The 14th Amendment the same way. Now, is a U.S. citizen bound to obedience to an unconstitutional law? This comes from another Supreme Court ruling. Are you listening? Go ahead.
No one is bound to obey an unconstitutional law, and no courts are bound to enforce it. Wow, that's a big one.
That's right. So you're not required to be obedient, and when you're disobedient, guess what? The courts can't force you to do it.
But they're going to tell you it is constitutional. You're going to have to know your beans until you tell them it isn't.
What that means, you're going to have to go back to court again and see. This is part of the problem today. But here again, are we going to just cave in? Or are we going to do what's necessary? This is why. Listen. This is why there are many organizations out here that are actually looking for people to make contributions so that they can defend you in a court of law all the way to the Supreme Court. That's what Jay Sekulow does in Washington, D.C. And there are others that do that same thing. But just understand this. No one is bound. No one is bound to obey an unconstitutional law, and no courts are bound to enforce it. Okay? Here's another deception, okay? What is that?
Well, U.S. citizens are told that only courts, and ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court, can determine what is constitutional or unconstitutional.
See, any court other than the Supreme Court is a part of the judiciary, okay? So you got the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary. So it's not just the Supreme Court, but U.S. citizens are told that only courts are ultimately and ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court can determine what is constitutional or unconstitutional. What did we just tell the people a little while ago? Who's the one who determines?
We the people.
Thank you very much.
We
The people are sovereign, and if the Supreme Court makes a bad decision, we have the right to do this and say, no, that's not right, and I'm not going to be obedient to
the right
it.
to challenge it. Yeah.
That's right. Now, I'm going to read this.
Again, this is not true. But why is this not true?
So what's not true? What is not true is that the Supreme Court is not the final authority in what's constitutionality. So why is this not true? Here we go.
We have learned that we the people, not the Supreme Court, are sovereign in America. And we the people should never forget that.
See, here again, that's so simple.
We just cave in to the...
See, that's so simple. But, yeah, we are, oh, no, that can't be it. No, just not me. I only got an IQ.
The shame of it is that there's some people, not just all millennials, that want it that way. They would rather say, I'd rather have the government tell them what to do. Wrong.
That's exactly right, Steve. Now, let's move on from there now.
Okay. This principle is most helpful when the Supreme Court rules something to be constitutional when in fact it is not.
And so the principle is this, that we are supreme, not, we're sovereign, we're supreme, not the Supreme Court.
That really comes in helpful when they have a bad ruling on something that's not constitutional.
That's exactly right. Now, let's talk about this. What is earthly sovereignty? What is earthly sovereignty? See, we're talking about sovereignty. Well, what is earthly sovereignty? Now, this is just a term that I'm telling us, trying to distinguish something, okay? Well, let's do this. Share that with us.
Sovereignty means the supreme authority or the final word.
See, so if we are sovereign, that means we are supreme in authority. That means we have the final word. That means you have the final word. That means those people online with us, they have the final word. Those people on Facebook, you have the final word. You have to understand that. So when somebody's missing, that's the federal government, even the state court, if they are messing with your freedoms, you have a right to stand up. Why? Because you are the supreme authority. And the truth of the matter is, it doesn't make any difference whether the judge tells you no, whether the attorney tells you no, a politician tells you no, your husband tells you no, your wife tells you no. No, you are sovereign. Well, okay, yes. Okay, the next point.
The true sovereign of the universe is always the Christian Godhead.
Okay, so now see, we're talking about
universe, not earthly.
That's right. We're talking about universal, not earthly. That's exactly right. So while someone says, "Well, wait a minute, you're telling us that I am the supreme." No, just say we're talking about the difference between a spiritual authority and an earthly authority down here. So yes, we recognize that the sovereign of the universe is always the Christian Godhead. God the Father is the author of the plan. God the Son is the executor of the plan. The Holy Spirit is the revealer and restorer of the plan. However, in Arkansas, and the other 49 states,
we the people are the earthly sovereigns.
That's exactly right. God is not asking us to ask Him to solve our problems. He's telling us you need to solve your problems down here, okay? Now, notice this. We're saying here in Arkansas and in other 49 states of the Union, we the people are the earthly sovereigns. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to get another court ruling, and there are several dealing with this. So, for example, Chisholm versus Georgia, Penhallow versus Doan's Administrators, McCulloch versus Maryland, down here, Yickwo versus Hopkins. In every one of those cases, this statement is alluded to, and here it is. Read it.
In the United States, sovereignty resides in the people who act through the organs established. Organs.
Go ahead.
Let me read it all again. In the United States, sovereignty resides in the people who act through the organs established by the Constitution.
Now, the organs here, the organs of the Constitution, are actually Article 1, Article 2, Clause 2, Section 2, whatever. Okay, that's right. So, in the United States, sovereignty resides with the people. This is the Supreme Court telling you. And what are we going to do? Because we are the sovereign, we're going to act through the organs established by the Constitution. We're going to act in accordance with everything that Constitution says. Okay? Now, what about this?
So, we the people, individually and collectively, can determine what is constitutional and what is unconstitutional. while always being responsible for our decisions and actions.
So just because you're sovereign, and see, this is where I go back to this General Assembly man here in the state of Arkansas at the Arkansas Pastors Network. What he was asking me is who is sovereign? Well, I am sovereign. No, you can't be sovereign. The Supreme Court. He said, if you were sovereign, he said, guess what? Then we would be a country that would be ruled by mob violence. No, that's not so, because what happens, knowing that I, you, we, they are the sovereign, guess what we're going to do? We're going to always be responsible for our decisions and actions. That means we're doing what we're doing because this is the right thing to do, okay? Now, notice this about our representatives in the federal government. This would be your state senators. This would be your state House of Representatives. This would be the president and the vice president. Our representatives in federal government. Go ahead, read this.
Well, every person functioning in government, according to their constitutional oath of office, is required to determine the constitutionality of their statements and actions before they act.
Okay, Senator, okay, House member, excuse me, let's see. I see you just said something. You just did something over here.
Voted this
but these things that you said or you did are outside the boundaries of the Constitution. So what happens is we need to understand that when they go to Washington D.C., they take an oath of office, and according to that constitutional oath of office, they're required to determine ahead of time the constitutionality of their statements and actions before they act, not after they act. See, you made that comment. You alluded to that early on in our program, okay? Now, with that in mind, they're supposed to do that, and they are bound. They took an oath of office that says, this is what I will do.
So they should say, are my decisions in line with my oath of office and in line with the Constitution before I act on it?
Well, see, the oath of office actually says, I'm binding myself to the Constitution. Now, watch this. Go ahead.
Further, if people functioning in government discover something unconstitutional or do something unconstitutional, our representatives are required to do everything lawfully possible to correct the error.
So what happens is, let's suppose that our state senator is aware of what's going on, and it was somebody over here in some other area did something wrong or acted in a certain way, and he discovers it, she discovers it. Guess what? According to their oath of office, they are responsible because they're representing us to do something lawfully to get that thing corrected. Now, what's happening is people in Congress right now know that some of these things are unconstitutional, and guess what? They're not representing us. They're keeping their mouths shut for whatever reason.
They're turning the blind eye.
That's exactly right. Now, let's ask a question here. What about Congress? Now, look, this is another Supreme Court decision, Perry versus the United States. What about Congress? Listen here.
The Congress, as the instrumentality of sovereignty, is endowed with certain powers to be exerted on behalf of the people in the manner and with the effect the Constitution ordains. The Congress cannot invoke the sovereign power of the people to override their will as thus declared. Okay,
so here's the issue. This is saying that Congress as the instrumentality of sovereignty. Question, who's sovereign?
We the people.
That's you and I. So Congress is the instrumentality of the sovereignty of we the people. What does that mean, instrumentality? They're working for us.
Yes, exactly.
They're the instrument to get this thing done. So the Congress, as the instrumentality of sovereignty, we the people, Congress then is endowed with certain powers to be exerted on behalf of the people.
We gave them that power.
Excuse me, hang on. They're endowed with certain powers. Where do they get their powers?
We gave them to them.
And how do they know what they are?
It's in the Constitution.
There you go, Steve. They're written in the Constitution. And those powers are to be exerted on behalf of the people in a manner and with the effect that the Constitution ordains. Now, notice this. The Congress cannot invoke the sovereign power of the people. The Congress cannot invoke. What that means is they can't take our sovereignty away from us and then take that sovereignty and use it whatever way they want to. So read that last part of that statement right there.
That Congress cannot invoke the sovereign power of the people to override their will as thus declared.
And see, that comes from a Supreme Court decision, Perry versus the United States. Okay? Now, let's move on from here. Congress has the instrumentality of sovereignty. What's that mean?
This phrase indicates that Congress is the agent that works for we the people. That's you and me.
That's right. See, they're our agent.
Mm-hmm.
We are the owner, and we say it's sort of like some Chevrolet company out here, or Ford company out there. You're the CEO. You own the company, but guess what? You're not the mechanic. The mechanic and everybody else is doing the work for you. They are the agents. So we own the deal. Congress is working for us. They are the instruments that are carrying out what we're telling them they're to do.
Or could we say they're supposed to be doing that?
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And that's why if we don't know what they're supposed to be doing, you look up and everything you got's gone. So here's the issue. One at a time, Steve.
Congress works for we the people.
Do you understand that out there? Okay. Next.
Congress doesn't work its own interest.
That's right. It doesn't work for its own interest.
Congress works to protect the interest of we the people.
What's the key word there? P word.
Protect.
That's why they're there. Congress is not there to G word, give you something. The Congress is there to protect the interest of we the people. Now, what are the interests of we the people? Just
life, liberty, property, and pursuit of happiness.
That's exactly right. Those are our inalienable rights. Now, let's go back to
phrase
made in pursuance thereof. Let's go back to that for just a minute. Go ahead and read this, Steve.
So the words made in pursuance thereof in the Supremacy Clause mean that all laws and all treaties must be made in strict compliance with the original intent of the explicit provisions in the lawful Constitution for the United States of America.
Absolutely. Now, what happens if it deviates?
Well, any deviation from the original intent makes the alleged law or treaty null and void from the time that it was allegedly enacted.
So, see, it wasn't enacted. It was allegedly enacted because it's unconstitutional. So any deviation from original intent, what was the intent of this thing? If it deviates from that, it's null and void. And it's null and void all the way back to the time that it was allegedly enacted. Now, how about this?
Well, also, each change to the Constitution must be done exactly according to Article 5 of the Constitution for a constitutional amendment to be valid.
See, Article 1 tells Congress what to do. Article 2 tells tells the executive branch what to do. Article 3 tells the judiciary what to do. And Article 5 tells you how to amend a constitution.
Well, that's what the problem is today, because all this stuff they're trying to change is not constitutional.
They're for example, right now, we're going to see that what happened, not tonight, but we're going to see that the Supreme Court is reinterpreting certain words in the Constitution, and what they are doing is they're usurping authority over the Congress because that rule is making law that's unconstitutional. So changes, guess what? Go ahead.
Changes cannot legally be made by the Supreme Court.
Okay.
Changes cannot be legally made by congressional legislation.
That's right.
Changes cannot be legally made by executive order.
We're talking about changes in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Now, for example,
the so-called 14th Amendment was neither lawfully approved nor ratified.
No.
Therefore, the so-called 14th Amendment never was, not, and is, and never will be constitutional. Everybody knew that.
Listen to that, yes.
The 14th Amendment is not, and has not been, and never will be a valid part of the Constitution for the United States of America.
That means, now, and what you need to understand is as we expand our understanding of this Supremacy Clause, we're going to find out that the Supremacy Clause, by way of the 14th Amendment, is actually taking away some of our freedoms. And the 14th Amendment is unconstitutional, as is the understanding of the Supremacy Clause. Okay?
Been through that.
Okay, go ahead.
Further pertinent information.
Go ahead.
Anything that is based on the so-called 14th Amendment is also null and void from the time it was done, and no court decision is necessary to confirm that anything based on the so-called 14th Amendment is also null and void.
You don't have a court. You don't have to have a court out there to tell us it's. In other words, if they pass a law that is based on the 14th Amendment, the
Isn't it?
14th Amendment being unconstitutional, you don't have to have a court system out here to tell us this thing that they just passed out here based on the 14th Amendment is unconstitutional. You don't have to do that. It's already null and void. Go ahead.
The 10th Amendment, wait a minute,
No, here.
The Constitution strikes with nullity that which does violence to its provisions.
See, when you understand what the Constitution actually says, then the Constitution itself, rightly understood, nullifies anything that's unconstitutional. But we've got to know what it says. So the 10th Amendment.
Well, the 10th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America was added to confirm the true meaning of the Supremacy Clause and to help resolve conflicts.
So when you understand the 10th Amendment, that 10th Amendment is going to help you to understand what the Supremacy Clause was all about. Now, I'm going to keep going. We're on page 11 now, and we need to finish this tonight, okay? Go ahead.
The powers delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people.
Okay, now stop and think this.
I
The
got it.
powers not delegated to the United States. So here it is. We got 100%. We're going to give 3% to the federal government, okay? Now, what that says, the powers not delegated, that would be 97%,
Right,
okay?
they don't have.
That they don't have. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states. Okay, that means the states got some stuff over here too, and
It says the federal government cannot.
that's right. Okay, now watch this. So what happens is, if we haven't delegated it to the federal government, those rights then not delegated actually are reserved back to the states and we the people.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now let's move on from there. What does that mean?
The only authority that the federal government has is the authority that we the people have delegated to the federal government. That authority and absolutely no more.
Now let me read this. All authority originates with we the people. We need to understand that. Now what happens here, we the people then possess all authority. And we the people possess all authority, we delegated some of that to the states. That's where they got the state constitution. But we also took some of that authority that belonged to us and we delegated some of that to the federal government. Now what happens is, look at the size of those boxes, okay? We still have the majority of it. Now, neither we the people nor the states can usurp the authority that we the people delegated to the federal government.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay? This authority not delegated to the federal government, the 97% that we got, this authority not delegated to the federal government is retained by the states and we the people. We delegated this much here, but we keep all this ourselves. Now, the states and we the people retain all authority not delegated to the federal government. Go up and look at that in the diagram. So if you know what the Constitution says, Article 1, Article 2, or Article 3, if you know what that says, you know what we've given them. Now, everything else belongs to us. So neither the states nor we the people have the authority to usurp authority granted by we the people to the federal government. We can see that up there in that diagram. Now, the phrase, nor prohibited by it to the states. Look here. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states. Okay, let's come back down here now. The phrase, nor prohibited by it to the states, in the 10th Amendment refers to the power retained by the states and we the people, because that power was not delegated to the federal government, nor prohibited by it to the states. Power prohibited by the Constitution to the states is the power that we the people delegated to the federal government. Power prohibited by the Constitution to the states. See, if we give this authority to the federal government, we can't use that. We've delegated over there. Now, state law cannot violate authority that we the people have delegated to the federal government. You see that?
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Every power not delegated to the federal government is retained by the respective states, all 50 of them, and we the people. Now, a compound republic, unique on the earth. We the people are supposed to be a compound republic in America. That term, understand it, compound republic. A compound republic consists of the following. Here it is. A compound republic has a state government and a federal government. The alternative to that is a single republic, which has only a federal government. So a compound republic that was given to us by our founding fathers is a state government and a federal government. Now, inside the state government, we have a Congress, We have an executive branch and we have a judicial branch. We have a General Assembly, that's Congress, a House of Representatives, Senate. The executive branch is the governor. The judicial branch is the Supreme Court. Congress, on the federal level, Congress, House of Representatives, Senate, executive branch, and the judicial branch, okay? So this is a compound republic, okay? In a single republic, it looks like this. You have a federal government with a legislative, executive, and judicial branch. James Madison in Federalist 51. James Madison in Federalist 51 said this. This whole thing is what he said. In a single republic, that's the bottom one down here. You don't want that. But in a single republic, all the power surrendered by the people, see, recognize we got it, but we gave it to them. Surrendered by the people is submitted to the administration in a single government. And the usurpations are guarded by a division of the government into distinct and separate branches. If you have a single republic, you should have a virtuous legislative, executive, and judicial branch. But that's not the way it happens. In a compound republic, right here, in a compound republic of America, in the compound republic of America, the power surrendered by we the people is first divided into two distinct governments. In other words, we have all authority. We give some to the state and some to the federal government. But while we surrender some to two different distinct governments, and then the portion allotted to each, the portion allotted to the state, is going to be subdivided among distinct and separate departments. They'll have a Congress, they'll have a legislative branch, they'll have an executive branch, and they'll have a judicial branch. Hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people, because the federal government has the same thing. The different governments, state and federal, will control each other at the same time that each will be controlled by itself. So what happens to different governments? The state government is going to control the federal government because this is all you can do. And if you do more than that, we're going to stop you. The federal government has been given authority. If the state tries to usurp that, guess what? The federal government says, no, these people have given us that. You can't do this. Stay out of our business. Okay?
At the same time, they control their own self.
That's right. And how do they do that? Through the legislative branch, executive branch, and the judicial branch, in both the state and the federal level. Now, state governments control the federal government. Federal government controls the state governments. Each government controls itself by its own three branches. The state and each officer, now listen to this, the state, each officer, employee, and agent of the state has a constitutional duty to interpose itself or himself or herself between the citizen or citizens and the United States government when the federal government commits or attempts to commit an unconstitutional act. What that means is we the people, state government, and then the federal government. If the federal government is unconstitutional, the state government is required to interpose, stand between the federal government and we the people. Here's what happened. Thomas Jefferson called this act of interposition, he called it nullification, which he considered the right remedy of usurpations of the federal government. Those persons in the state, county, and or local governments who fail to interpose, listen to this, if they fail to interpose, step between the government and you and me as citizens, these people fail to interpose as it and their constitutional duty. If they fail to do that, they violate their constitutional duty, they violate their oath of office. In the state of Arkansas, for example, Article 20, Section 4 of the state constitution has the oath of office. Senators and representatives and all judicial and executive, state and county officers, and all other officers, that would be municipal, that is part of our city, both civil and military, before entering on their duties or on their respective offices, shall take and subscribe to the following oath of affirmation. I, give your name, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Arkansas, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the oath of office to which I'm going into, upon which I am now about to enter. They swear an oath of office to interpose between the federal government and us. The United States is a unique government created by a written constitution of enumerated and limited powers that were delegated to the federal government by we the people. Conclusion. Read it, Steve.
Federal government laws are only the supreme law of the land when a federal government law does not go beyond delegated federal government authority.
Pray for us, Steve.
Mm-hmm. Father, we thank you for these freedoms you've given us, and that you knew that there needed to be order and for the preservation of civilizations and mankind to further the gospel. And without these things, we lose our freedoms to teach the word and share the gospel. And they're in danger today, Father. So we pray for our president, our leaders, our lawmakers, all those in office who are, especially those who are trying to do right, Father. For those who are evil and trying to pose evil on us, thwart their evil influence, Father, expose them and remove them from influence so that we can have more time, that little bit of time that you've given this country to try to get it right. These things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. It's warm inside the building, but hang on for me just a minute. I'm going to mute my mic.